I'm really excited about today's story. This is actually going to be part one of a two-parter, and it's going to cover the story of my third book, Backyard History, Rebellious Women in the Maritimes cover story, which you can support the podcast by ordering at backyardhistory.ca. This image on the cover is of our heroine today, and it shows Beryl Markham immediately after the events in the story, with her head bandaged up, all surrounded by reporters and photographers, and she's grinning at the camera. And Beryl Markham herself also wrote a book. Her book sold extremely poorly, and then her book went out of print. The book was forgotten, and so was its author, Beryl Markham. All that changed suddenly nearly half a century after the events in Cape Breton that had briefly made her into a global celebrity. On the opposite side of the world, a Los Angeles restaurant owner was casually reading through 900 pages of the personal letters of Ernest Hemingway, as one does, and in those letters he found something really shocking. Ernest Hemingway once had something nice to say about someone. So while Ernest Hemingway is definitely one of the greatest authors in human history, he, shall we say, isn't exactly known for having very many words of praise for other writers, especially other writers who happen to be women. Which is why the restaurant owner was so shocked when he read the following words in a letter penned by Ernest Hemingway.
Did you read Beryl Markham's book, West with the Night? She has written so well, and marvelously well, that I was completely ashamed of myself as a writer. I felt that I was simply a carpenter with words, picking up whatever was furnished on the job and nailing them together, and sometimes making an okay pig pen. But this girl, who is, to my knowledge, very unpleasant, and we might even say a high-grade bitch, can write rings around all of us who consider ourselves as writers. It really is a bloody wonderful book.
This California restaurateur mentioned his discovery to a customer. The customer happened to be a book publisher. Soon enough, this long-forgotten book was reprinted, and it instantly caused a sensation in both America and Europe. Beryl Markham was tracked down in Kenya. She was now in her 80s, and she was flown to America, where media outlets fawned over her. Several documentaries about her were filmed, biographical miniseries about her was made, multiple Hollywood movies based on her were shot, and a crater on Venus was named in her honor. She was finally receiving credit for what happened decades earlier, way back in 1936, when she crash-landed in a bog in Cape Breton. I, for one, try really hard not to judge books by their cover, but I do judge them by their opening lines. And Beryl Markham's book, called West with the Night, opens with some pretty amazing opening lines.
How is it possible to bring order out of memory? I should like to begin at the beginning, patiently, like a weaver at his loom. I should like to say, this is the place to start, and there can be no other. But there are 100 places to start. After all, I am no weaver. Weavers create. This is remembrance.
You're listening to Backyard History, the hidden stories that happened in your own backyard, the podcast version of the weekly history column running in newspapers across the Maritimes, with your host and author, Andrew McLean.
I have seldom dreamed a dream worth mentioning again, or at least none worth recording. Mine are not enigmatic dreams. They are peopled with characters who are plausible and who do plausible things, and I am the most plausible amongst them. All the characters in my dreams have quiet voices, like the voice of a man who telephoned me at Elstree one morning in September of 1936, and told me that there was rain and strong headwinds over the west of England and over the Irish Sea, and that there were variable winds and clear skies in mid-Atlantic and fog over the coast of Newfoundland.
If you're still determined to fly the Atlantic this late in the year, the Air Ministry suggests that the weather it is able to forecast for tonight and for tomorrow morning will be about the best you can expect.
It was September 4th, 1936, when Beryl Markham was awoken by that phone call from the Royal Air Force, informing her that the weather was clear over the Atlantic Ocean. It was the day she had chosen to attempt to fly solo from England to New York City, something which had never been done before by anyone, man or woman.
I lay in bed half suspecting that the telephone call and the man who made it were only parts of a mediocre dream that I had been dreaming. I felt that if I closed my eyes, the unreal quality of the message would be reestablished, and that, when I opened them again, this would be another ordinary day with its usual beginning and its usual routine. But of course I could not close my eyes, nor my mind, nor my memory. By tomorrow morning, I should have either flown the Atlantic to America, or I should not have flown it. In either case, this would be the day I would try.
By this point, it had been 17 years that aeroplanes had been flying across the Atlantic Ocean. However, they'd been flying from North America to Europe. Never before had any successful effort been made to fly from England to North America. It had certainly been attempted, though, mind you. It was just that the planes and their pilots who had tried all disappeared in the vast, icy Atlantic and were never heard from again. You see, the prevailing winds and the weather in the Atlantic are considerably harsher one way than the other. The wind was working against any would-be pilot who flew from Europe to America, while the other way, it would be at the pilot's back. This was during the mid-1930s, and this was a splashy era of record-breaking advances in aviation. Flying a plane over an ocean was seen as a testament to not only the daring of the pilot themselves, but as a show of how much we had all advanced, technologically speaking, as the human race. Beryl Markham wrote that.
It is all too much that with all those pedestrian centuries behind us, we should, in a few decades, have learned to fly. It is too heady a thought, too proud a boast. We fly, but we have not conquered the air. Nature presides in all her dignity, permitting us the study and use of her forces as we may understand. It is when we presume to intimacy, having been granted only tolerance, that the harsh stick falls across our impudent knuckles, and we rub the pain, staring upward, startled by our ignorance.
In her book, West with the Night, Beryl Markham reveals that the whole idea for her dangerous and unprecedented historic flight began at, of all things, an aristocratic dinner party.
I could remember everything about the dinner party, even the menu. I could remember June Carberry and all her guests and the man named McCarthy leaning across the table and saying,
JC, why don't you finance Beryl for a record flight?
I could lie there staring at the ceiling and recall JC's dry answer.
A number of pilots have flown the North Atlantic west to east. Nobody has done it alone from England, man or woman. I'd be interested in that, but nothing else. If you want to try it, Beryl, I'll back you. I think Edgar Percival could build a plane that would do it, provided you can fly it. Want to chance it?
Yes.
I could remember that better than I could remember anything, except JC's almost ghoulish grin and his remark that sealed the agreement.
It's a deal, Beryl. I'll finish the plane and you fly the Atlantic. But gee, I wouldn't tackle it for $1 million. Think of all that black water. Think how cold it is.
I had thought of both.
It seems that for Beryl Markham, the record-breaking flight she would become most famous for was something of an afterthought. It was just one other adventure in a life that was filled with so many. Beryl Markham was born to a relatively wealthy family in England, but at the age of 4 moved to Kenya, which at the time was a British colony. She fell deeply in love with her new homeland.
My life had been and was a physically active life, spent in a country many of whose first settlers still tilled their own fields. Childhood environment had not inclined me toward a bookish existence, nor did flying seem to me, at first, anything but adventure on wings. That textbooks had to arch their ugly backs in the midst of this pretty dream was a mild blow.
Her father was a trainer of racehorses, which she raised even when she was a child. After her father left the family to go to Peru when she was 17 years old, Beryl quickly established herself as a renowned and highly paid horse breeder and trainer. All of this life changed very suddenly when an airplane flew over her farm in Kenya, and it circled around twice, and it landed right there in front of her.
The rest of the world may have grown complacent by then about airplanes flying in the night, but our world had barren skies. Ours was a young world, eager for gifts, and this was one.
Airplane landed right next to her, and out of it emerged its pilot.
He nodded at the half-dozen of us grouped around him, yawned as if he had never yawned before, and asked for two things: a cigarette and an ambulance.
The pilot was named Tom Black. He had previously been a mildly famous airplane racer, and he was coming to Kenya with the intention of starting a business delivering mail with his plane.
Tom Black had flown 6,000 miles with a new aeroplane and a new idea. His dream had sprouted wings and wheels. He had an authentic voice that would wake other dreamers.
While stopping to refuel, he received word that 3 British tourists had been on a safari trying to hunt a lion. But in a dramatic turning of the tables, the lion managed to hunt the 3 British tourists instead.
Lion, rifles, and stupidity. A simple story as he told it, and it was. None of the characters were distinguished ones in it, not even the lion.
The pilot, Tom Black, was in the middle of flying the injured man to the hospital when he stopped to repair his plane.
I asked where had he been. He shrugged, looking at me with eyes that were disturbing in their clarity. They were blue and seemed to dissolve all questions and all answers within themselves. They were eyes that may have followed the trajectory of a cat through a chapel window with more amusement than horror, but might at the same time have expressed sympathy for the fate of the cat. I said, I think I'm going to leave all this and learn to fly.
Over the next decade, Beryl Markham went on to become an expert flyer, one known for several headline-grabbing, dramatic flights. One of her more memorable examples that will ring a bell with the podcast listeners would be when she sparked an international incident while flying from Kenya to London. This flight path took her over Libya, which at the time was an Italian colony whose commander would be a name that you might remember. She was detained as a spy and she was arrested. She was released, though, after a personal intervention by Italo Balbo himself, who you may remember from the Backyard History podcast episode called When the Italian Air Armada Came to Town. As she prepared to make her historic flight across the Atlantic that fateful morning in September of 1936, a decade after she first met him, Beryl Markham anxiously looked around for Tom Black. But Tom had not shown up.
That didn't matter much, I thought. It didn't matter because Tom was unchanging. He assumed that I learned all that he had to teach me, and for my part, I thought of him, even then as the merest student must think of his mentor.
Another pilot had come to see her off, though. Jim Mollison had once been such a great aviator that he had been a household name. That was years ago, though. The Scottish pilot's crippling alcoholism had since then gotten the better of him. After several near-death crashes, including not one but 2 in the Maritimes, the first in Penfield in New Brunswick and the second near Sydney in Cape Breton, Jim Mollison had stopped flying. As Beryl Markham made her final preparations, photographs from that day show her face betraying uncharacteristic anxiety. Jim Mollison picked up on this and he took off his watch and he handed it to her. He told her that it was his lucky watch and that it had gotten him through many near-death experiences. Jim Mollison then sternly told Beryl Markham that his watch was not a gift, but rather it was a loan. He said that she was not allowed to keep his lucky watch. He said that when she survived, not if, when she survived her flight and she became the first person to ever fly from England to North America, she had to return his lucky watch to him. His display of confidence in her calmed her before takeoff. Tom Black wasn't merely a teacher and a mentor to her, though. He and Beryl Markham had long been off and on lovers as well. Tom, incidentally, was not Beryl's husband. She was married to Mansfield Markham, who was at the time a very famous British film director, 3 years younger than her. Beryl Markham was quite well known in the tabloids for her many love affairs, one of the most notorious of which was with a British prince. That was actually how she ended up leaving Kenya and ending up in England. See, the Kenya Beryl Markham grew up in was a colonial possession, and it had this reputation as this idyllic, slow-paced paradise. It was known for its wildlife, including lions, zebras, elephants, and its really relaxed pace of life. Except for this one place, which was called Happy Valley, which, despite its name, was known as a den of hedonism, famous in the Roaring Twenties for attracting wealthy elites from all over the world who partied hard with sex, drugs, drinking, affairs, and murder. Actually, a weirdly high amount of murders in this place called Happy Valley. These two young British princes came to visit Happy Valley in the Roaring Twenties. One was Edward, the heir to the British throne, who would later abdicate to marry an American, scandalizing the world. And there was also his younger brother, Henry. According to the Daily Mail tabloid newspaper, when the two princes arrived on their Kenya trip, 26-year-old Beryl Markham was at a party they attended. Everyone else was dressed in fancy dress, but Beryl Markham showed up wearing pants. This was already scandalous enough for a woman back in the 20s, but she also had a shirt which was described by the tabloid as having more buttons left open than was considered proper. Everyone was bowing and curtsying to the princes, but Beryl Markham walked right up to them and said,
"Hello there."
And then she hugged them. The younger prince was instantly infatuated, and this kicked off a several year-long, off-and-on affair. The prince told her to come to London, and she did. True to his word, Prince Henry met her at the docks when she arrived, and he set her up with a luxury apartment near Buckingham Palace. According to historian Jane Ridley in her freshly published biography of King George V, which is called King George V, Never a Dull Moment, which is an ironic title because he's known as being quite dull, Beryl and the prince's affair was forbidden by the king since she was not only divorced, but she was actually currently remarried a second time during this affair. Undeterred, her and the prince continued the affair, sneaking around together inside of Buckingham Palace itself. And
was spotted running barefoot along the corridors of Buckingham Palace.
Beryl Markham had a kid, and in a really strange twist, this prince thought this kid was his son. The kid was not his son, and some basic math would show that this is totally true because the prince was off on an extended tour of Asia, so the birth times they're off by like 3 months. It's definitely not his kid. But the prince thought it was his kid and secretly paid for the child's whole upbringing anyways, on the off chance that he was a secret son of the prince. Anyways, I do have to say I didn't expect any of this when I was looking into the story. What actually got me started off on the story was I went on a hike in an isolated part of rural Cape Breton, and I found this little pile of rocks with a plaque on it saying in 1936 Beryl Markham crashed an airplane into a bog here. I hadn't, at this point, actually heard of Beryl Markham. I thought maybe she was some plucky local farmer or something. I started researching into it, and then one thing led to another, and next thing I knew I was down this whole crazy forgotten rabbit hole involving Ernest Hemingway and illicit affairs and royal princes and record-breaking flights. Also, I do, though, I want to highlight that she entirely accomplished everything here all by herself. She had like a grade 4 level education. She was an elementary school dropout. In her own telling, she just couldn't sit still or focus in school, so her parents let her drop out to help with the horses. Despite this, though, she had this really incredible writing ability, which you're hearing in this episode. And she developed this entirely on her own as an adult through her own sheer raw talent and drive. But here's the thing, even after all this research, I was never able to properly answer why she even made that extremely dangerous flight that crashed in Cape Breton in the first place. Most people didn't think she'd survive it, and it's really not clear that she herself thought she'd make it. If it was a publicity stunt, she was definitely not doing a very good job of it. That morning, as she was waiting for takeoff, she had officials from the army keep the crowds that had come to see her take off far away. Like way away from the airport itself. She had them stay way out in the middle of the road so that she could not see them or hear them. And the public that had come to see her could not see or hear her take off. According to her book, she wrote that as she took off,
on a long flight, distance and time are the same. But there had been a moment when time stopped and distance too. It was the moment I lifted the blue and silver gull from the aerodrome, the moment the photographers aimed their cameras, the moment I felt the craft refuse its burden and strain toward the earth in sudden rebellion, only to listen at last to the persuasion of stick and elevators, the dogmatic argument of blueprints that said she had to fly, because the figures proved it.
As Jim Mollison watched from the ground as the little plane vanished from sight into the distance, with its pilot wearing his lucky watch, he turned to another onlooker and flatly declared, "That is the last we'll ever see of Beryl Markham." It turned out that he didn't believe in her after all.
So she had flown, and once airborne, once she had yielded to the sophistry of the draftsman's board, she had said, "There, I have lifted the weight. Now where are we bound?" And the question had frightened me. We are bound for a place 3,600 miles from here, 2,000 miles of unbroken ocean. Most of the way it will be night. We are flying west with the night. I feel the security of solitude, the exhilaration of escape. The fear is gone now. Not overcome, nor reasoned away. It is gone because something else has taken its place. The confidence and the trust, the inherent belief in the security of land underfoot. Now this faith has transferred to my plane, because the land has vanished and there is no other tangible thing to fix the earth upon. Flight is but a momentary escape from the eternal custody of the earth. You can live a lifetime, and at the end of it, know more about other people than you know about yourself. You learn to watch other people, but you never watch yourself, because you strive against loneliness. If you read a book, or shuffle a deck of cards, or care for a dog, you are avoiding yourself. The abhorrence of loneliness is as natural as wanting to live at all. Being alone in an airplane for even so short a time as a night and a day, irrevocably alone, with nothing to observe but your instruments and your own hands in semi-darkness. Nothing to contemplate but the size of your small courage. Nothing to wonder about but the beliefs, the faces, and the hopes rooted in your own mind. Such an experience can be startling as the first awareness of a stranger walking by your side at night. You are the stranger. Rain continues to fall, and outside the cabin it is totally dark. I am flying blind. A beam to follow would help. So would a radio. But then so would clear weather. The voice of the man at the Air Ministry had not promised a storm. I feel the wind rising and the rain falls hard. The smell of petrol in the cabin is so strong and the roar of the plane so loud that my senses are almost deadened. Gradually, it becomes unthinkable that existence was ever otherwise.
But the thing was that Beryl Markham wasn't going to Cape Breton. Her destination was New York City, and in New York City there were tens of thousands of people there waiting for her. Her unexpected success in crossing the Atlantic and crashing into a remote bog in Cape Breton would soon draw the entire world to an isolated part of the Maritimes.
That was Backyard History with your host, Andrew McLean. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for another hidden story that happened in your own backyard. Produced by Jordan Lozier.